I am a female corrections officer in a state with a relatively high number of death row inmates. However, few executions are actually carried out. I used to work for a large county, but I work for a very different agency now. This county was my first CO job years ago, and before that, I had worked in retail and customer service while studying criminal justice, so I was really green. I used to be very liberal. I'm still liberal about a lot of things, but the job does change your perspective for most people. One thing that I used to believe very strongly was that no human being could be truly evil. This particular county jail is one of the oldest in the country, so parts of it have a totally linear layout. What I mean is that you have a long stretch of corridor with cells on either side, and the COs have to walk up and down to supervise the inmates. As you can imagine, these linear layouts are not in style anymore because you cannot see every cell at the same time, but every inmate can see you. I have to say that units like this are extremely creepy too. I'm going to call this corridor the condos. We do not call it that, but I do not want to share the exact term which is specific to this jail. Less than 10 years ago, a quadruple stabbing homicide happened not too far from where I grew up. The murderer, Michaels, described it as a butchering, and he killed his former girlfriend, her family, and their neighbor because he had come over when he heard the screams. When the police found Michaels soaked in blood and asked him what had happened, he said, "It's obvious, I just killed everyone." At that time, I had only been a CO for about 4 months, and our facility received him as a pre-trial detainee. Now, obviously he wasn't our first or only murderer, but the nature of the crime and his lack of remorse was horrifying. He was considered a volatile inmate, so we placed him in an observation cell in the middle of the condos where a CO could always keep an eye on him. He would stand at his glass door in silence most of the day, just watching everyone. I swear he only really spoke when he had visits. He actually had a full visits list of these big goth girls who would come in and swear they were in love with him. I don't know if this means anything, but his ex was a big girl, and he used to draw pictures of the fat female COs. For note, he was skinny and white with brown hair. One day, I was working as a utilities officer, basically a floater who relieves people for breaks and helps out as needed. At this jail, utilities officers also got away with a ton of downtime and BSing. I was hanging out at one end of the condos where you could look down and see a lot of the jail, talking to another officer on duty. As they say, there are no secrets in jail. Plus, I was aware that there were points throughout the jail where you could hear very well into neighboring cells, that sort of thing. We were being pretty quiet though, plus we stood a good 50 yards away from Michael's observation cell. Also, you have to imagine, it would be difficult to stand in the observation cell and press your face against the glass to see the people standing at the right angle so far from you. I was telling the other CO a funny story about my weekend, which I wouldn't do out on a correctional unit nowadays, but we weren't getting into anything too personal either. It was a long story involving my fiance at the time. I wrapped up talking to this CO because I had to go to the gate to relieve another officer for chow, and I had to pass Michael's cell. I didn't like walking past it because he stood there and stared at you, and back then I wasn't so good at hiding my nervousness. He always had his head slightly tilted down so you could see the white under the irises of his eyes, again, rarely saying a word. But today was different. I took one step past his door and I heard him say, "Edgecombe," in a barely audible whisper. I didn't even know he knew my name. Yes, our last names are in our uniforms, but I was never his primary officer and we'd never interacted. It caught me off guard, so instead of ignoring it, it stopped me in my tracks and I backpedaled to the door. He pointed to his mouth and I leaned in to listen. His eyes looked so dark. I remember I felt hypnotized. He proceeded to recite word for word the story I had just quietly told the other officer at the end of the condos less than 2 minutes before, even copying the sound of my voice down to a subtle lisp. This seemed to go on forever. I felt like we were the only two there. No 22 millimeters of glass protecting me, just a 5-foot-tall female and a murderer. I remember thinking for the first time of another human being, this is evil and unfixable. Finally, I said, "Sir, do you need something?" He started to laugh hysterically, and I walked away. I have been assaulted by other inmates. I've had piss thrown in my eyes. People play mind games with me consistently. I've met some damn good lip readers too, but this was like something else. Now I work at a maximum security institution where I babysit all rapists and murderers and pedophiles. I don't know how to make this make sense to you, that this was the one and only time in my life where I felt inside of me like I was dealing with something not human. Michaels is in another institution now. He is on death row. He refuses to appeal. He made it clear to the press that this decision is not out of remorse. He has none. He just doesn't give a shit, and it is the most logical in his mind for him to die. Inmate Michaels, if you ever do get out somehow, please, let's never meet again. The following story was transcribed by J Nightmares, titled The Trunk. I wrote a series of stories based on my career as a tow truck driver. You can find them online. This isn't one of my stories. I am really glad this isn't my story, to be perfectly honest. It's one of my buddy's stories. He also had a long career as a tow truck driver. This story takes place about 15 or 16 years ago, maybe a little more or a little less. What happened was infamous. It was all over the local news. My friend was even on the news. It started off innocuously enough, a simple job for people in our line of work. It was just a car which had been parked in a car park of a residential area. The windshield stuffed with illegal parking tickets and the threat of impound pending. Residents' complaints about this vehicle were constant. The police got involved, and eventually my friend was called to tow the car away. Since no one came forward or reacted to the threat of the removal of their car, my friend requested police assistance on removal just in case. Things tend to get more serious in people's minds when they see the tow truck opposed to a bunch of tickets. It can go bad quickly. My friend wasn't too worried because he was a veteran in this kind of work. I told him when the call came in that he might be better off taking a flatbed truck because of the length of time the vehicle had been sat there. He was already thinking the same as me. So he arrived at the building and noticed the car instantly. He positioned the truck and hopped off to make an inspection. Standard process. Seemed like a routine job, he said, until he noticed the trunk. There was something wrong with the trunk. He was grateful to have the police on hand because the trunk appeared to be welded shut. It could still be towed since we have tools to access the driver's side door. That's never an issue. But what was the story with the trunk? The policeman on scene wanted it open. He said that if we attempted to open it, perhaps the owner of the car would come running out and then the cop could charge him. My friend tried with tools to no avail. At this point, a few people from the residential building had gathered to look. My friend chose to use the winch to try and lift the trunk open. The car lifted off the ground, and when it landed back on the ground, some black liquid splashed underneath the car. He said it appeared to come from the trunk. It stank. The small crowd stepped back without being asked to. My friend did the right thing and refused to tow it at this point until the police had invited forensics to take a look. When all the relevant people were present, they ripped the lid off the trunk. What followed was an enormous cloud of flies. They stepped forward, and my friend said he saw a liquefied human skeleton. The stench, he said, was indescribable. He said he threw up almost instantly. He called me for moral support, but I had worked the night before and I was sleeping. Man, did he curse me out the next day for that. We never got an ending to this story, unfortunately. We always wanted one. I feel sorry for whoever was left to rot in that trunk. You see some very weird things in this line of work, sometimes supernatural and sometimes very explainable. To me, truth is always stranger than fiction. This happened about a year ago, and I still have yet to return to the store without my husband. So last July, I took my then 4 and 6-year-old sons to Target to back to school shop. Since having kids and hearing all these horror stories, I am very observant of my surroundings when out. Anyways, while at Target, like most women, I look through all the sections. While in women's clothing, I noticed two older men close by that kept looking over our way. I thought maybe I'm just being paranoid, so I kept going about my business but keeping my boys super close. We go to the baby section. They pop up. Toys, makeup, and the same thing happens. I was really feeling uneasy because they seemed to be everywhere we were, and they never had a cart. One guy was holding one little thing. I go to check out and wait for a big group of nurses leaving Starbucks to walk out with. I threw the boys in the car without buckling them in and locked the doors. As soon as I look up, the two guys walk out empty-handed looking around. I didn't think they saw me, so I started to leave when I looked in my rearview mirror and saw them behind me in a truck. I stopped right there, turned and took a photo so they could see me. They turn like they are going back to the store, and I park over a couple stores down and call the cops. While I'm on the phone with them in a full-blown panic, I watch one of the guys change his shirt and go back inside. I waited until the police got there so I can make sure they were caught and they had the right guys. I don't know what their plan was that day, but my mama gut told me it wasn't anything good. I am so thankful my babies and I are okay. The following story was transcribed by J Nightmares, titled Woman Digging a Hole in the Mountains. Last winter, my girlfriend and I had a huge argument while we were driving home late night in the mountainside. She kicked me out of the car and left me there. I thought that she'd come back soon, but she didn't, and to top it off, I realized that my phone was in her car. It was the dead of night, not a single car passed by, so the only option was to walk. I was so annoyed. I decided to use a shortcut instead of the road my girlfriend and I drove up. The grass was long on this road, but I could tell that a car had driven down here recently. Some of the grass was flat. This shortcut probably doesn't get used much, so I found it a bit strange. It was a hard walk. I was cold and frightened. I wanted to quit. It was horrible. It was the dead of night. The hillside was so dark, I couldn't really see where I was walking. Then, I saw a light. A small family car was approaching. It was behind me. Its bright light shined past me. It was warm on my back. Was it running out of gas? Well, whatever. For the time being, I thought I'd at least ask to borrow their phone. I stepped into the middle of the grass road and called out, "Excuse me." I regretted this idea almost instantly. Without thought, I plunged myself into potential danger. I had no idea who was in the car or what they were doing in the mountain woods so late at night. "What's wrong?" a woman's voice called out from the car. I explained the situation. I asked if I could borrow her phone. "We're out of the service area," she replied very calmly. With that said, I decided I wanted to get the hell away from her. "Well, I better get going," I said while turning to leave. "Please, help me." By saying these few words, it ensured escape was impossible. "Help me dig a hole. If you help me just for a moment, after we're done, I'll take you anywhere you want to go." As she said this, her right hand was idly making scooping gestures above her head, as if to cover it. Swinging her hand in that pendulum style made me wonder, if I were to refuse, what might happen. I frantically dug a hole. While I was digging, the woman watched and talked to me. I can't remember most of the conversation. It doesn't make a difference now. She seemed to like talking. She was asking me all kinds of questions about myself. I thought it would be a bad idea to give her the correct answers, so I just made them up as I went along. Finally, I finished digging the hole. She went to her car and brought back a bag. I thought I was about to see a corpse, but I was wrong. The bag was overflowing with hair. Too much hair for one person. "Are you a hairdresser?" I nervously asked. There was no reply, just silence. It was terrifying. She brought lots of items from her car and threw them in the hole I dug. There were children's toys, clothes, etc. The last item was a cooler. I was terrified that there might be a child in there. My heart started pounding in my chest. By the end of it all, I didn't know what to think. She gave me a ride home as promised, and it was finished. I began to forget about the incident over time, but this year, I found a paper bag in front of my house. I looked inside. It was full of hair. I remembered the incident on the mountain and wondered if this could be a coincidence. Surely it had to be related. I decided to tell my good friend about this situation. My story certainly sparked his curiosity. "Let's go back there and dig up what you two buried," he asked. "To be honest, I want nothing to do with those bags of hair," I replied. But he said, "Why don't you just tell me where the place is then?" He kept asking and talking about it at work. It got to the point where I ended up going with him. I didn't want to though. One day after work, we headed towards the mountain. He decided to invite another work friend too. We drove up the mountain road. There was a chain sectioning off the grass road I had walked down. My friend got out and hooked it. The grass had grew a lot since last year. It bent beneath the wheels of the car. It was like we were surfing. I couldn't quite remember where the hole was since it was overgrown now. I thought because of this, my friends would give up searching for the hole. Nope. So I just thought I'd say, "Oh, here's the hole," in the hope that we dig there and find nothing. Then we would all go home and it would be over. But then it occurred to me that anyone would be able to notice the difference between a place that had been dug up. The grass would obviously be shorter and the soil would be a different color too. "Here it is," my friend said with glee. "Absolutely," the other added. "Park up and shine the headlights in this direction and let's dig this up fast," my friend shouted. I wanted to get home quickly, so I didn't protest and helped them. With the three of us men digging, we were able to unearth the things the woman threw away quickly. When I helped her bury all that stuff from her car before, it was dark and I couldn't see very well. There were a lot more things than I could remember. And there was the thing I was worried about the most, the cooler box. My friend wrenched it open. Black water splashed out. My friend dropped it and all the black water sloshed out. "What the hell?" my friend said. I was expecting a body," my friend's friend said. "This isn't a novel, this is reality," I said. We filled in the hole and went back down the mountain. On the way back, my friend suddenly started to scream and shout about his hand feeling like it's burning. When he opened the cooler, the black water splashed on his hand. We all turned ghastly pale. We rushed to the closest hospital. My friend got examined and the doctor told us that he had suffered a corrosive burn to his hand. He got treated for it and we were relieved. But in the end, the mystery remains a mystery. Nothing was resolved. I guess that's the end of it. Last year, I was going out for drinks with my friends, but since I had to go to uni the next day, I only stayed till around midnight. My boyfriend promised to pick me up and go home with me because I don't like to take the subway alone at night, but since I was pretty drunk by then, I took a little too long to walk out of the pub. Unfortunately, we had to wait for the night bus since the subway closes on weekdays at night. For context, my boyfriend and I don't live together, but we live very close to each other, around 15 to 20 minutes walking distance. Both areas are pretty shitty. He lives near a train station with many crackheads, homeless, and sketchy people around. I live in a cheap, bad district with a high crime rate. My building has two entrances on two different streets because it is a corner building site leading to a patio and then to the apartment building and its doors. I usually use the entrance door that is closest to the subway and on the side of my apartment. We had to take two buses to go home. One drove us to the train station and the next one from the train station to my apartment. After getting off the first bus, we realized that we would have to wait for around 20 minutes or something for the second bus to come, and since I really had to sleep at home because of class, I didn't want to stay at his place. My boyfriend didn't want to wait, so he persuaded me to walk instead of taking the bus, which sober me would have never done, but since I was still drunk, I didn't care how we got home, so I agreed. So we started to walk home and passed a few sketchy people, but nothing really bad. Then I saw a guy walking in our direction, and I somehow got a bad feeling, so I told my boyfriend that I wanted to change to the other side of the street because I didn't want to walk past him. Suddenly, the guy yelled, "Hey!" as if he wanted to ask us something. but we ignored it and continued to walk. He got louder and louder until he started to yell. I could see from the corner of my eye that he was coming over, so I whispered, "Run," to my boyfriend, took his hand, and ran the fastest I could while he was chasing us. We ran, and then made a turn to the right on the street where I lived and then hid. It seemed like he was gone, so I took my keys out and we started to run towards my building, taking the other entrance of my building that I normally didn't use. As I was trying to open the door, my boyfriend started panicking, throwing me inside the patio and closing the door aggressively, and then pushing me into the building. He explained that the guy came running from the other side of the street, meaning he took a shortcut, probably thinking we were going to run to the bus stops. If we had taken the other entrance, he would have clearly been the faster one. Being in shock, we unfortunately didn't call the police, which I regret. I stopped going out for drinks for half a year after this and slept at my boyfriend's place for 2 weeks because I was scared that he would come back. I think the worst thing about this is that he really wanted to get us for whatever reason. I still don't know why he chased us for so long. 2 weeks later, a girl a few streets away was violated in front of her building by a guy who chased her home. I wonder if it was the same guy or just a coincidence. One day at work, me and a couple coworkers were lounging lazily outside, smoking on a break. One of my younger coworkers told us this story that his dad told him, as it had happened in the recent last couple of years. He explained that his father did some type of work involving checking and diagnosing power lines for problems with electricity. At the time, he was working at a popular ski resort just a little ways up the hill out of our small historic town. On the evening of the incident, one of these ski lifts was out of order, so he was called at near dark to check and follow the power lines to find the problem. So he set out, equipped with a flashlight to see what was going on. After he checked a couple poles and followed the lines, he sat down for a break before continuing. Once finished, he switched on his flashlight in order to see through the falling snow and darkness. In the snowbound silence, he made his way to the next pole, following the nearly invisible power lines against the black sky. As he approached the next pole, he noticed an odd shadow behind it, dancing in the swaying beam of his flashlight. At first, he really wasn't sure what it could be, but as he got closer, he began to get the feeling of dread in the pit of his stomach. That feeling grew as he started to realize that he was seeing a pair of legs sticking straight up out of the snow at the base of the power pole. One leg was still attached to a snowboard, while the other leg was free of the board and bent at an angle. Nothing moved. There was only the stillness and silence of the snow slowly falling around him. He wondered for a few seconds what or if there was something he could do to help the victim. He decided to run up to the site and try and save the victim by digging them out by hand. He dug and dug furiously and panicked, only to realize that as he dug down enough to expose half of the body, that he was much too late to save them. He's not sure how long he just sat and cried, helplessly. Eventually, he got up and went to inform the necessary people of his grisly discovery. But the staff had already known whom he'd found. Apparently, earlier that day, a family had reported their daughter missing to the ski resort staff after she had left the group to catch the ski lift up to board back down. When she failed to return after a couple of hours, they started to worry. That worry turned to terror after over 8 hours had passed. What had happened was that on her way down the hill while snowboarding, she most likely noticed the power pole a little too late, and trying to stop, she fell headfirst into a tree hollow hole that had formed at the base of the power pole. Unable to dig herself out from being upside down, she eventually suffocated. She had managed to yank 1 foot loose from the binding on the snowboard in her desperation to free herself. For a long time after seeing that, his dad had occasional nightmares, but he says that what really stuck with him was that overwhelming feeling of powerlessness. He really wanted to save her. That was the most terrifying part to me. This is a true story, hence the throwaway account, and it's one of the first times I've ever told it to anyone. 15 years ago, I made one of the worst decisions of my life. I began dealing for a well-known biker gang. No, I wasn't a member, but I had connections to one of their members through a mutual friend, Josh. I had a short history in dealing years before I got clean and walked the straight and narrow. I worked 3 jobs and was saving for college. However, tragedy struck when a very close relative of mine was murdered by her new husband while they were traveling in his home country. What made this even more difficult is that they had canceled their life insurance, so the cost of returning them to our country and the funeral arrangements fell on me and 2 other relatives. Now, this isn't an excuse for what I did. I just wanted to provide some context to what was going through my head when I met with Josh and asked to set up a meeting with his relative Mike, who was a member of a well-known biker gang, so that I could get back on my feet financially. If you're asking yourself why I didn't just pursue one of the millions of other avenues for financial assistance, it's because I was young, stupid, and wanted to replace that lost feeling with something I thought would make me feel better about myself at the time. So I gathered a team of hand-picked dealers at my house and waited for Mike to come by and discuss business, and soon enough, he arrives with 2 pounds of weed to front to me. My plan was to only involve myself by distributing to my runners so that I could work my regular jobs while making a passive income. Side note, I had known Mike for about a year at this point, which is why so much was given up front. The term front means to loan, and the term runner refers to a dealer who works for you. Things went well over the next year and a half. My team expanded. I was making a ton of money. I sold the weed to my runners by the ounce, paid a discount per pound, and was making hundreds in profit a week and thousands a month. I was happy, Mike was happy, and he only ever had to deal with me and it never had to meet or address any of my runners. However, this is where the story takes a drastic turn for the worse and why you should never trust a biker gang, especially when you're not working on the inside. I had just hired a good friend of mine as a runner. She needed money, was a single mother, and wanted to sell it to her friends who came over and always needed weed. This girl ended up selling through ounces faster than anyone else, so I trusted her with more product to sell at once since I would have to come back 2 or 3 times a week. However, I was going on vacation for 3 weeks and wanted to make sure that she had access to enough while I was away, so I left her with a lot more than I usually would. When I returned, I had come to collect, and everybody but her was up to date on their payments, and after excuse, she came to me to inform me that her new scale was set to the wrong measurement system and that she was out a good amount. I was upset and nearly kicked her off the team, but I've known this girl for years and it wasn't anything I couldn't recover on my own. However, she came to me when I was supposed to meet up with Mike to re-up, and because this took a lot longer than I thought, I was late to meet him. Now, remember when I said that you should never trust a biker unless you operate on the inside? I met with Mike to let him know what happened, apologized for being late, and informed him that the situation had been dealt with. But Mike was furious. He tells me that because I was late, he was late meeting his connect for the weed, and since he was late, this connect would never deal with him again. He told me to meet him at Josh's house and to bring who was responsible for making me late, and if I didn't bring them, then I would be held accountable because this connect had made him $5,000 a week in profit. Yes, you heard that right. This man told me that him being late once dissolved a profitable relationship with a connect that earned him $5,000 a week. I already knew what this meant for my runner. We were good friends, and there was no way I was going to allow a single mother to go through what I knew was coming. So I showed up to Josh's house on my own and waited for Mike. I sat on Josh's couch for what felt like hours, by myself, and uncertain of the extent of what was going to happen. Then Mike walks in, greets Josh, talks with his partners a bit, while completely ignoring me. First 5 minutes go by, then 10 minutes, then Mike walks over and I remember waking up on the floor. From what I was told, Mike hit me across the head and I blacked out. He proceeded to hit me for 2 to 3 more minutes until I woke up to him still hitting me. We sat on the couch and with a handgun to my head, he tells me that he's going to charge me the profit he would have made every week from his connect for the next year. For those keeping track, that's $260,000. He tells me that he's going to be generous enough to do the first payment of $5,000 within 48 hours, and that the money that I just gave him for my re-up didn't count, and that I needed to return the weed. Also that he was giving me 24 hours for each additional $5,000 after that. He took my car, which he underpriced at $10,000, and essentially planned on using me as a human ATM. At this point, I knew what was happening, and despite our relationship for the past year, he was going to exploit me for as long as he could until he had a reason to get rid of me. So, I went home and thought about my options. I had around $17,000 in cash, my RRSPs, savings, which amounted to just over $35,000, but even that would only get me by on the payments for a week. I realized that, and even if I was able to come up with half of the money, I would end up in jail or worse. After 24 hours of deliberating, I considered the fact that Mike had never met any of my runners. My family had moved away from this town after the death of the relative, and there was no way that I was going to risk my life or my freedom for some arbitrary debt. So I took all my cash, made my savings available, and knew I only had 24 hours to run as fast and as far as I could. 4:30 a.m., I gathered a bag full of clothes, called a lifelong friend of mine who had moved to another country 4 hours away, explained the situation, asked if I could stay on his couch for a week, and took a bus as close to the Greyhound station as I could get without stopping in front of it. The Greyhound didn't require photo ID at the time, and I didn't want to fly out of my own city in case anyone saw me, or Mike was able to figure out where I was going by pressing any of the airport staff. At this point, my heart was beating out of my chest. Although the Greyhound isn't as busy as the airport, if Mike or anyone he knew saw me there, it was game over. I waited an hour, then walked inside and bought a ticket for a city 3.5 hours away that had an airport. Before boarding, I wrote down all of my important contacts, removed the battery from my phone, dropped it down the sewer, and began my escape. 8:15 a.m., I stop in said city and buy a ticket to go and meet said friend. 12:30 p.m., I land in a country I've never been to, in a city I've never been to. My friend picks me up and we talk about the situation the entire way home. Him and I had a similar past. Although the story itself is ridiculous, he understands. When we arrive at his place, I cut my hair, decide on a new name I'll go by while staying in the city while deciding my next move. I get a new prepaid phone and number and try to relax. 6 p.m. I was supposed to meet Mike 30 minutes ago. The stress starts to kick in. 8 p.m. We've been drinking and telling stories, and I remembered that I hadn't deleted my Facebook. So I jumped onto my friend's laptop, threw on a VPN that was located in my home country, and was met with a flood of messages. Josh and Mike had kicked in my front door and destroyed my place. They left messages with the addresses of places they thought I was hiding out at. They told me that they were watching the airport and Greyhound station, and that it would be impossible for me to leave the city. It was at that point that I realized they never knew I left. Throughout the coming weeks, months, and years, I had a habit of changing phones and moved from city to city and country to country. I even did those work for your accommodation programs in a couple of countries as a tourist. Every few weeks and months, I would get an email from a single friend back home who would tell me that Josh or his girlfriend were telling people to ensure me that it was okay to come back and things had blown over. A couple times I even tried to reach out to some other friends back home, only to find out that they were trying to cash in on a reward that Mike had placed to anyone who could find out where I was. It eventually became easier to cut contact with any and everyone around me if I felt that I needed to move or felt that I couldn't entirely trust them. I could never go back to who I was or where I came from physically or mentally. I later found out that Mike had a nasty habit of hiring dealers. Then when he thought they made a good amount of money, he would conjure up some dire situation in which they would need to pay him back a crazy amount. He would drain them for every dime they had until they couldn't pay anymore. After that, they would usually end up in a ditch somewhere. One of his associates, who happened to be my next door neighbor back home, was recently charged for first-degree murder after taking a woman out to the woods and killing her. Although this did a number on my trust issues, I've made a lot of changes throughout my life since this event. I've changed my name. I'm in my mid-30s. I have an amazing corporate position in a company that changes lives. I speak to schools about the impact of poverty, and it's taught me to empathize with people in different positions than my own. I own a condo in a very beautiful city. I'm engaged. I took up learning a second language, and I never take the second chance I've been given for granted. I've been clean for just over 15 years now. I've never told anyone in my new life about what's happened. I don't even think they would believe me. Even though I take full responsibility for my stupidity in my younger years, to the biker that is waiting to collect on his ridiculous $260,000 debt, let's not meet again. The following story was transcribed by J Nightmares, titled The War. This happened a few years ago, but I still remember it as if it was yesterday. I will never forget what I saw that night. I was at home, doing nothing in particular when a friend called. He said he wanted to get out of his house and asked if I wanted to hang out. I thought, why not? This was at about 3 a.m. I'm not even sure why I was still awake, but I was. He said he would come pick me up in his car. We were driving around the city for a while, and my friend suddenly said, "Hey, let's go to the wharf." So that's where we headed. Down by the pier area, by the wharf, there is an old factory. In the daytime, trucks are in and out of there all the time. It's a pretty busy area, but at night, it was quiet. The roads by the wharf are really wide and straight. On weekend nights, you can sometimes see people racing there, but at night, we were the only ones on the road. It made for quite a tense atmosphere. We headed to the wharf like we were being drawn there. We stopped at a traffic light and a car pulled up alongside us. I cannot remember the model or the color of the car. I guess it was more like a minivan than a car, come to think of it. Either way, it was bigger than a normal car. I am in the passenger seat and my friend is driving. The light changes color and I look at the car and the people in it. I got a really weird vibe from one of the guys in the car, so I kept watching. I couldn't put my finger on what was weirding me out about these guys at first, but then I noticed one of the guys in the back seat. I could do little else but wonder what was bugging me. Then it dawned on me. The reason I felt something was off about one of the guys was because I couldn't see the bottom half of his face. It was as if it was completely black, like it was missing. Why was it black? I wondered. I thought I was hallucinating, or I was just tired. Still, I kept on looking at the guy. I was curious. I locked eyes with him, and then the car sped away before the lights changed. They ran the red light. In the split second that I saw the guy, his eyes flashed my way. I had never seen such a look of desperation before or since. His eyes seemed to scream at me. He pressed his face against the window, and then it was like he was pulled backwards before the car sped off. When he was close against the window, I realized that the black thing I saw was tape covering his mouth. It all happened in less than a couple seconds. The look of fear in his eyes stayed with me. I was deeply concerned. The minivan sped away into the night towards the wharf. I had heard rumors that Yakuza used to hang out there and are responsible for some of the missing persons cases in the area and for some of the bodies that are found washed up in the wharf over the years. Some people say the wharf is haunted because of this too. It's always been known as a kind of test of courage to head there at night on the weekends, but I have never spoken to anyone who went down there on a weekday night. We don't know what goes on down there when the town sleeps, but I think I saw a glimpse of it that night. Could this be a prank? I really hope that was what I saw. I guess that's the only outcome I can live with. I didn't get the license plate, and we didn't follow the van. It just happened so quickly. Now I am older. I know that if I saw it again, I would be more proactive. This weighs heavily on me, still to this day. I told the police a day or two after it happened, and I never heard back from them. When I think back to that dark summer night, and those split seconds I saw that man with desperation in his eyes and tape covering his mouth, I can't help but shudder. Just a little note before we get started. My son looks nothing like me, and I have a baby face, so when people see my son and I, they see babysitter, not mother. I'd just gotten off from work, and my husband was waiting for me with our son, who was 4 months old at the time. We ordered something to go, and my husband went to use the bathroom while my coworkers gushed over my baby at the pickup counter. I see this older man watching us, but I dismiss it because my son usually gets a lot of attention. Plus he came to the McDonald's pretty regularly and didn't raise any red flags. He came up to us and smiled at my son and asked if he could hold him. I politely declined. He pulls a 20 out of his wallet. "Why don't you take this and get yourself a sandwich and leave the baby with me?" he said, trying to hand me the money. "No, thank you." I tried to be polite. I needed my job. We just got a new general manager and I wanted to make a good impression. "Aren't you hungry? It's so hard working 2 jobs. I'm sure if anything happened, the parents wouldn't blame you." I was about to go off on him when my husband came out of the bathroom and placed himself between me and the man. "Oh, you must be the father." He offered my husband the money, but didn't talk about taking our son. We made our way out of the store and the man followed, offering us money the entire way. My husband, fed up, stopped on a dime. The man ran into him and my husband stared daggers at the man until he went back into the store. A few weeks later, he came back to the store. He ranted about how he could have given that baby a better life than that young man. I told him I was the mother and that he could get his sausage biscuits somewhere else because he wasn't welcome here anymore. So, creep that tried to buy my son, let's not meet again. My husband and I went to Disney for our first anniversary. I always wanted to go as a kid, but it never happened, so we made it happen as adults. While we were there, we decided to check out the Space Center in Cape Canaveral. It was off-season, so there weren't a lot of people. There was a space simulation ride that my husband wanted to try. Basically, it was in what looked like a movie theater with seats that vibrated and shook as if it was taking off into space. I wasn't interested in trying it. Instead, right outside the room was a camera that showed the inside. So my husband went in and sat in one of the seats in the front row as I watched it all on the camera screen right outside. There was nobody else in there. Before it started, a man and woman and 2 young kids came. Unlike me, the woman wanted to try the ride. The husband and kids chose to stay outside by me. As I watched the camera, I saw the woman walk past the many rows of empty seats and sit right next to my husband in front. While I thought this was very odd, it looks like they exchanged words like, "Hello, what's your name? How's your trip?" etc. Her husband, who was standing next to me, said, Whoa, is that your husband?" "Yes," I said. "What is he doing?" "She's my wife. What is he trying to do?" he asked angrily. My shy husband was just being polite, nothing more, but this guy was losing his mind. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, your wife is the one who chose to sit in that seat. She could have sat anywhere else. The guy continues, "What is she doing?" He starts visibly punching the door and telling me to make my husband stop. He starts to fake cry and pulls out his hair. I'm getting freaked out inside, but I'm trying to look cool. His kids were young, but I can sense their anxiety. I know that once that ride was over, I had to get my husband and get out of there, because I think the guy wanted to start a confrontation. He kept gritting his teeth and staring at me, like you better put an end to this. The ride finally ended. My husband was the first one out. I immediately pulled his arm and went to the opposite way saying, "We got to leave." He told me later that the woman was just making friendly chit-chat about Disney. Thankfully, we didn't run into them again after that, but I wonder if his wife cheated once, or maybe he was just a control freak. The experience really soured us to never want to go there again. This happened a few days ago while I was on my way home from visiting my friend's house. I was driving on a back road late at night in my Tesla Model 3 while it was on auto drive. I'll admit that I was not paying attention to the road and I was on my phone while I had music playing in the car. The ride was okay and chill for a while, but I'm not really sure because I was not paying attention to the time. Out of nowhere, my car immediately braked and made an alarming sound. I was scared shitless and immediately took control of the wheel and looked through the windshield. When I looked, I saw a figure standing inches from my car, barely avoiding being hit. My heart was racing from impact and now seeing what I could only assume to be a person. They didn't even flinch from the sight of almost being hit. I looked at them for a good 10 seconds before I put my car in park and turned on the megaphone to ask them if they were okay. They didn't respond and proceeded to walk near my window. I locked my doors while they were approaching because I was terrified. They asked me if I could roll down the window to speak to them, but I refused and told them that I could hear them from the other side. I then asked why they were out there all alone in the cold, and they told me that their car had broken down and that they were hoping someone would stop to help them. As they were talking, I got a good look at their face, and they appeared to be 25 to 30 years old. They also asked me my name, and I told them my name was Rebecca, and they told me their name was Ashton. After that small talk they attempted, I told them that I would be calling someone to come assist them with their situation. They weren't happy with that and insisted that I drop them off to a friend's house who lived nearby. That's when I became really freaked out and suspicious. They had told me that they were waiting for someone, and now they needed me to drop them off. I then put my car back into drive and told them again that I would be calling someone to come help them. They then tried to reach for the door handle, but I guess they forgot that Tesla handles are embedded into the car. When they did that, I immediately stepped on the pedal and went flying down the road. I didn't even look into my rearview mirror and put the car back into autopilot. The whole ride back, I was scared shitless. I got back onto the main road where I would hope to see cars and just floored it home. I couldn't get my mind off of it for the rest of the night. I have suspicions that that guy was not alone and that there was other people with him. I pray that they didn't get someone else who wasn't as lucky as me. I will never in my life stop to help some random person ever again. I went into Target in my Chick-fil-A uniform. Earbuds were my mission. I made it over to the earbud section and a guy starts to say something to me. I don't know why it's always these short men in their mid-30s. He was going to ask if I worked there, but I turned towards him. He saw my uniform and I said, "Oh, no, I don't, sorry." And then I walked into the aisle. Well, I come out of the aisle and he continues to try to talk to me, asking me if I live around here, work at the place nearby, etc. Then he said, "I'm really shy, but I wanted to ask you if you wanted to go for coffee sometime." I looked him straight in the eyes and said no. I walked down another aisle and then cut back to the main walkway. I thought he finally left, but no. He rolls back up with his one item in his cart, starts talking about something, I don't remember, but I was giving simple replies and mentioned I have a boyfriend. He's like, "Oh, okay," and continues to try to talk to me. So I hit him with the critical, "I'm only 17" line. He makes this super exaggerated face with his mouth wide open and looks me up and down, then says, "You're very mature for 17. So I quickly walk to my friend that works at the return and checkout section so she can ring up my item. The end, right? Wrong. I was telling her about this creepy guy who wouldn't leave me alone. He was getting his item checked out 2 or 3 kiosks away, and my friend said he was still staring at me. I just talked to her for as long as I could to wait for this guy to leave. Well, he rolls up behind me and asks to return the one item he literally just bought. So I told my friend that I was going to head out. I walked up to an employee that greeted people at the door a couple of feet away and loudly said, "This creepy guy is following me and he won't leave me alone." He thankfully walked me to my car. As I was driving away, guess who I saw in the parking lot looking for me? I yeeted out of there so fast. That's the real end, my friends. I worked as a flight attendant for a few years when I decided to take an extended sabbatical from college. There were a handful of let's not meet situations I encountered, but one in particular still makes my skin crawl more than any other. I was born and raised in Texas, but I had moved to New York when I was 21. So when I found out at the beginning of a week-long trip that I had a couple of overnights in Austin, I was super excited to go to my home state for a few days. My brother lived just north of the city, and we planned to hang out and go to dinner the night I arrived when he got off from work, and the following day we were going to meet up with our dad who lived about an hour away. So I get to the hotel downtown, the crew and I check in, and then we each head off to our rooms. Short elevator ride and I get to mine, where not even 5 minutes later, there's a loud, hard knock on the door. It was only around 1 or 2 p.m., and I hadn't called either my dad or brother to let them know I was in town yet, so they wouldn't know what room. I assumed it was just one of my crewmates, so I headed to the door. Before even making it to the door, however, a loud male voice on the other side boomed. "The front desk sent me about the bathroom problem you called in," before trying to open the door. "Unlock the door and open up. Miss, I need in now." I froze in my tracks. I hadn't even been in the bathroom yet, let alone called anything to the front desk. I'm a petite chick, and while I take no shit from anyone despite my size, I still err on the side of caution. Slowly inching toward the door to look out the peephole, all I could tell was that the man on the other side was at least 6 foot tall and easily over double my weight. No way in hell was I going to unlock the door. I responded to the guy, telling him he must have the wrong room. He continued pounding on the door while constantly turning the handle, telling me no, he needed in and he was getting in the room one way or another. I panicked, but thankfully had the sense to grab the phone and call the front desk. The concierge confirmed that they had neither sent anyone up to my room, nor had they received a call about the bathroom. The entire time, this guy was still determined to get in my room, pounding and yelling. Lucky for me, the front desk had dispatched security to my floor. When the security officers stepped off the elevator a few seconds later, I could hear them in the hall approach the guy and ask who he was, what he was doing, and telling him he needed to leave the hotel. He immediately gets hostile and aggressive towards them, and the front desk clerk I'm still on the phone with tells me the police have been called and are on their way. In the meantime, I'm trapped in my room, scared shitless. Long story short, the cops show up pretty quickly and manage to arrest the guy for trespassing and criminal menacing or something. I later found out that the guy was also wanted in connection to a string of break-ins and violent sexual assaults in Austin. He had seen and stalked me from the minute I entered the hotel lobby. Apparently, I was exactly his type of victim. Nothing else happened after that, but it still rattled me for the rest of my stay in that hotel.